Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation the Car Company Tycoon game. Continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 1991. And the model we're going to be looking at in this video is the Edison Comet, which is our full-fledged sports car. And I'm actually leapfrogging over a number of models that I probably would have done first, or at least covered first. Namely, for instance, the Asteroid, which is my pickup truck. I actually started the build on this. And I didn't finish it, and the main reason I didn't finish it was they have now implemented 4x4, which is something I've been looking for with pickup trucks and SUVs of this era, for instance. And it doesn't seem like it's really finished or working as maybe it should, at least in my mind, because I put it on the Asteroid, and what I was getting didn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense. And there seemed to be some elements that were just not finished. Now, I'm running the beta version of the game. I don't know if this part, the 4x4, is available to everyone or not. But if it is, honestly, when I look at it, it doesn't look like it's really working as it should. But that's my opinion. And, sometimes I don't always see eye to eye with the devs. And we'll continue on, though, with the Comet, as I said. And we'll start off with what I would consider the base trim of the Comet. And we'll start off at the beginning with the Comet. So which body I chose. Now, this is one element that I also don't agree with. And this is the fact that with how many body choices we have, I have to go down till I get to this point, which is this body. This is the body I chose. Because I feel like it's appropriate for the style of the car that I'm going for. This suits that well. Well, the game considers this a quote-unquote older body. And as a result, I get a penalty for selecting it. But what other choices do I have out of the newer bodies that would suit that mid-engine sports car that I'm looking for? Well, this body? Well, this is a prototype racer that you would use in like Le Mans or something like that. Not a street car. Or a hypercar at, the very least. And not really what I'm going for with the Comet. So by choosing the body, the only body that I have available to me that suits what I'm trying to build, I get a penalty when it comes down to the desirability of this car. And we'll see that a little bit later. So that's one thing I really don't necessarily agree with. And I don't think makes a whole lot of sense. Because if you think about it logically, then that means a 911, a Porsche 911, would have a massive desirability penalty to anybody that would be interested in that type of car. Because it's a design that dates back to the 60s and hasn't changed a whole lot since. As a matter of fact, I have a Porsche 911 from 1999, and I've seen the current ones, and I'll tell you, being inside one, not a whole lot has changed. Yeah, they've got fancy infotainment systems, and the suspension system has changed a bit, but when it comes down to the body and the actual interior design and layout, it's the same car as it has been for years. And, I don't agree with that. So you're saying in real life, people would just be like, oh, 911, that's just too old of a body for me. I just don't agree with that. And I'm sorry if that's a little bit of a rant, but I mean, you have to think about these things and, real life terms sometimes. Any case, what I ended up choosing for the body, we have a monocoque, which is the only choice for this body, or the chassis, I guess I should say. A corrosion-resistant steel. Mid-transverse is the engine placement. We have double wishbone both in the front and rear, maximizing the sportiness and handling of the vehicle. And then we have corrosion-resistant steel for the panel material. Now, this is one of the selections that I kind of went back and forth with in my mind. If I had chosen polymer, for instance, we could have kept the costs low, but brought that weight way down. And as a result, our overall performance, at least for, 0 to 62 times, top speed, the actual sportiness of the vehicle would have been much improved by doing that. But we would have lost out in prestige, technically in safety as well. And I honestly don't really care about that too much. But I think that drop in Prestige was a little bit too much for me, and that's why I ended up going the route I went. And also, by going corrosion-resistant steel, I did make the vehicle heavier, which gave us more weight on the wheels, which is going to combat wheel spin. So that was a couple of the reasons why I went with corrosion-resistant steel. I wasn't really prepared to go with handmade aluminum, not in a production vehicle. And carbon fiber seems a little bit too advanced for the time period, especially what I was going for, and very, very expensive. So let's look at the styling now. And we might be able to just do that in this tab. Yep. All right, so I went with a pretty simple look. You're going to have to imagine pop-up headlights for this vehicle. And I know there are mods that have pop-up headlights, but I'm trying to avoid the mods for the time being, especially seeing how this is early access. So you're going to have to bear with me on that. Well, let's just do kind of a 360 look around. And there we go. So simple but functional. All right, let's look at the engine we have in here, as it's probably been a while since you've seen that video. So we'll just go straight to the performance here. So we've got 261 horsepower and 243 foot-pounds of torque coming out of this engine. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the trim setup. So we're going to start with the gearbox. Now, as I usually do, I went with a 5-speed manual in this trim, the M standing for manual. And we went with a top speed that is going to make this 5th gear mostly an economy gear. Now, I didn't go totally for that, with the 5th gear being entirely beyond this estimated top speed. So this 5th gear is slightly an acceleration gear. And the spacing is a little bit on the more aggressive side because we didn't have a whole lot of wheel spin. Now, I could have gone more aggressive than I did and bring this here to 62 time down, but I figured 5.7 seconds was pretty good for the time period, especially with what power we have coming out of this engine. So I went with this. Now, as far as the tire setup goes, I went with Sports Compound Road. We have a larger rim than I normally work with, and I don't know how appropriate this would be in 1991, but I went with 17-inch rims, mostly because I wanted to allow us to have bigger brakes. The rim side is really going to impact that, but among other advantages. And with the tire width, I went with narrower tires in the front with 215 millimeters and wider tires in the rear, 265 millimeters. This is going to really help our handling. I went with a lot of rim offset as well for that front tire. First off, to fill out the body. But also, it gives us a little bit better, what is the word I want? Footprint. It gives us a little bit better handling. So with that wider profile. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the brakes. So I went with solid 2-piston disc in the front, solid disc 2-piston in the rear, but with smaller brakes in the front because of the the difference in where the weight is in a mid-engine car. And I also went with more aggressive pads. And as a result, we don't have a whole lot of brake fade here. It's only a little tiny bit of a penalty, which isn't bad. We will see worse in some of the other trims. As a matter of fact, all the other trims besides this will be worse because they'll be heavier, but not too bad for how high performance of a vehicle this is. So that's good to see. And that's, again, a large reason why I went with 17-inch rims is to get these bigger brake size, bigger sized brakes. Because that's how you contend with the brake fade. Now, with the aerodynamics, I went with fully clad under tray, and the cooling air flow, I always go with about 10 over the required cooling. And this graph is bugging out, as it sometimes does. With the interior, we went simple. We have 2 seats, which is the only option. We have standard interior and standard cassette, power steering, and anti-lock braking system. Now, in some people's minds, an ABS system is, if implementing that on a vehicle makes it not a true driver's car, not a true track car. And a lot of people will remove ABS systems from cars that they intend to take on the track. Now, if you're a very experienced driver and you know how to pulse your brakes and what have you, and to handle brakes so that they don't lock up, I can see where it might be advantage to not have an ABS system. But if you're not, ABS system is usually better. for most people, and that's kind of what we're trying to go for. We're trying to make it so that our customers, with the perceived customer base that we're going to have, aren't putting this up a tree. So we've made it a little bit safer for those people that are not, expert sports car drivers or track drivers. With the suspension, we went with standard springs, gas monotube, and passive sway bars. And as I normally do, I went with the normal preset, but I did quite a lot of tweaking to it. So this is quite a bit different from what the normal preset was giving me. I think I stiffened it up quite a lot. And I changed, I think, some of the balancing of how they did things, keeping an eye on this chart here. Now, you do notice quite a bit of a rebound here in the front, but there's not a whole lot I could do about that without really ruining the comfort and handling of the vehicle. So I did as much as I could. And I also brought the ride height down as low as I could without getting any bottom out. Now, I could have, again, been more aggressive with this setup and allowed for some bottom out, but I prefer not to have the bottom out because it will be a benefit to sporiness and roll angle, but it will be a penalty to pretty much everything else. So I try and avoid that if I can. And now let's go ahead and look at the detailed stats. And as I normally do, I'm only going to have this up for a few seconds to each tab. So we have drivability, we have sportiness, comfort, prestige, and finally safety. All right, let's look at our test track. And what we end up with is just a little bit under 160 miles an hour, 159.6. We already kind of saw the 0 to 62 time of 5.7 seconds. And the cornering G is not bad as well. So we have, 1.24 Gs and almost 35 miles an hour in the corners. So pretty decent handling. Let's go ahead and look at our track time. And I'm just going to be brief with this, just so that we get the times real quick here. So we've got 1 minute 30.16. Pretty darn good performance out of this. Some of the best I think I've seen yet. And with that looked at, I'm not going to look at the market share just yet. We're going to save that to the end of the video. Let's go ahead and jump into the automatic version. So we have a standard automatic. Now this is going to be more or less the same, with the main difference being an automatic transmission. This is going to be a 4-speed automatic. There's going to be quite a bit of a difference in the way that this transmission is set up. I don't have the last gear going beyond as an economy gear. Instead, I'm using it purely as acceleration gears. And this is to combat one of the big problems you have with automatic transmissions, is a big penalty in your 0 to 62 time. I don't know how realistic this penalty is because it seems a little bit severe, but with our setup, we were able to get it close in the ballpark of where we were before. 5.7 seconds goes up to 6.3. But if I hadn't done that changes, if I had kept everything else the same top speed, the same gearbox setup, it would have been a lot slower. It would have been probably close to 2 seconds slower. So I really had to change up that dynamic. We're noticing quite a bit more wheel spin, and I don't know, this might be a new change to the automatic transmissions because I don't remember automatic transmissions giving us so much more wheel spin. And yeah, I am setting up the gearbox a little bit more aggressively, more acceleration-wise, but if you think about it, with a 5-speed gearbox, we were set up even more aggressively if you just think about the 4 gears, not the 5th gear. If you ignore the 5th gear, if you think about just the 4 gears, those 4 gears were set up more aggressively than the 4 gears here. So I would think that this would actually have less wheel spin than our manual transmission, but that just seems to be the way it's working. All well. Let's move on. So all of these are going to be pretty much the same. I'm just showing them so you guys can see the handling graphs and everything. So brakes are going to be the same, but we will notice a little bit of brake fade increase, and I think that's difference in weight mostly. Aerodynamics are going to be the same. Interior is going to be exactly the same. Suspension is also the same. And then we'll go over our detailed stats. So detailed stats wise, we have drivability, sportiness, comfort, prestige, and finally safety. All right, now let's jump into the test track. So we've got a little bit more top speed. And again, the gearboxes are set up differently. And we already talked about the 0 to 62 time. Now, the cornering G's are going to be roughly the same. Ignore this. I don't know where these numbers are coming from, but they're roughly the same. I think we have a little bit less G's in speed in the wider turn here. But the sharper turn, at least I think that's how this works. This is a long continuous bend. This is a shorter bend. It looks like we might have a slight drop in performance here, but otherwise more or less the same. Let's go ahead and look at our time. Now, you're going to imagine this is going to be significantly slower, mostly because of that big difference in the 0 to 62 time. 0 to 62 time is going to be a big element of getting a better track time, and we see that dynamic right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into our premium trims. So the main difference we're going to have between the premium trim and the standard trims is going to be the interior. But there is a little bit of a difference in the gearbox. So if you remember the way the gearbox was set up with the other manual transmission, this is set up a little bit more aggressively. And it's set up more aggressively to make the 0 to 62 time equivalent. So we have 5.7 seconds again. Now there's going to be a little bit of compromises for that. We have a little bit more wheel spin and what have you. But outside of that, that's going to be one of the main changes. And I'm just going to go through this so, again, you can see the graphs. We're going to see a little bit more brake fade. Again, more weight causes more demands on the vehicle. Cooling airflow is going to be the same. This is the same engine. Nothing's really changed here. The interior is, as I already mentioned, where you're going to see the big difference. So we have premium interior, premium cassette. And the suspension setup is more or less the same. So the end result we're going to have, if we go to the detailed stats, we have drivability, sportiness, comfort, prestige, and finally safety. All right, let's jump into the test track. So it looks like we're a little bit slower top speed, but it's only 0.2 of a mile an hour. And we already discussed how the 0 to 62 is performance is going to be the same. Cornering G's are a little bit worse, I think overall, just slightly though. So let's go ahead and look at our time. So the time we end up with is 1 minute 30.39. Now this is actually pretty decent considering how much weight we've added on comparatively to the other manual transmission version. We had 130.16. So only a little bit above 0.2 of a second. It's not too bad. Let's go ahead and jump into the premium automatic. And this is going to be the last of the standard 3.6 liter engine variants. So again, starting off with the gearbox, it's going to be a little bit more aggressive than the other automatic transmission. That again is to try and keep it 0 to 62 wise equivalent. But everything else should be the same outside of that premium interior and premium entertainment that we already showed with the other premium trim. So we see that again here. Suspension is going to be the same. And let's look at our detailed stats. So we have drivability, sportiness, comfort, prestige, and finally safety. All right, let's jump into the test track. So we see about the same top speed we got with our other automatic transmission version. Same 0 to 62 time. I think, again, we're having a drop off a little tiny bit in cornering G. And as a result, you're going to see a little bit worse performance around the track, but not terribly so. So we have 1 minute 32.07. And if that's going to be our worst performance, I'm pretty happy with the way that this car did. All right, let's look at our last trim. And this one's going to be kind of the really pumped up sports version of this whole thing. This is the turbo variant. Now, you might notice right away a kind of a difference on the exterior, and that is right here. The wing. Yes, this thing has a wing, and it's a functional wing. So we'll see that a little bit later. But let's jump into the engine first. Now, I might have gone a little bit overboard with this engine, and I kind of had that feeling when I built it. And the end result is going to be kind of a bit of penalties towards us in some regards. So we've got big power, 375 horsepower and 352 foot-pounds of torque. But now, once we get into the trim here, you're going to note, and I don't know, the drivability and everything. Every once in a while, the car will load in with a little bit of changes here. And I'm going to see if it's the same thing I've always seen with this. No, okay, I don't know what's causing that, but we have a little bit of changes here with what stats we were getting. It's minute, and I don't know why that happens sometimes. It will recalculate what you have every so often. But in any case, with this gearbox setup, fifth gear being an economy gear, very much more so with this gearbox. And the spacing, I didn't go quite as aggressive. And the wheel spin, we'll note, is more than we've seen out of all the other trims. And this is because we're dealing with a lot of power, and I wanted to get more performance out of this, so I was a little bit more aggressive with it. I could have gone even more tame on the spacing, and as a result, gotten a worse 0 to 62 time, but more, less wheel spin, better drivability, and things like that. But I wanted this 0 to 62 time. I wanted the performance, and we can see it's 4.7 seconds. Pretty good, huh? Okay, let's go ahead and look at, and if I haven't mentioned it, all of these trims have viscous LSD. I think I kind of skipped over that, but all of them have it. So that's not really a difference, but that's one thing I should point out. Okay, let's go ahead and look. And the one reason, I guess what I meant to say is we have a big penalty in drivability that you might be noticing. And a lot of that is because of the engine. We'll see that when we get into the detailed stats, and that's probably one of the things I'm going to actually highlight. Is this engine, because you look at the way the gear, the way the power comes in. It's not nearly as straight of a line as we were getting with our non-turbocharged, our normally aspirated engines. It's much more wavy, and as a result, it's going to be a little bit trickier to handle for your normal driver. If you can keep this engine in its power band, like keep it up, into this level of the RPM, keep it up here, then you're going to have pretty decent smooth power. But before you get to that, it's not so much. It's coming in, a little bit not so smooth, and that's where we're getting a lot of that penalty. But in any case, moving on, tire setup's going to be pretty much the same, not any changes here. And that, is another thing about the wheel spin. If we had had wider tires or a different tire setup, maybe we would get rid of a little bit of it. But this is as wide as I can make these tires. So, and making the tires wider in the front is not really going to benefit us too much with the wheel spin, and it's going to really hurt our handling. So this is really, honestly, the optimum setup I have. Now, the brakes, we do have an upgrade here. We have an increase to a 3-piston solid disc in the front. Now I could go with vented discs, and honestly I didn't actually think about that, and that's probably something I should do, is go with vented discs both front and rear. That's going to really improve our performance. So there's an upgrade for the turbo that maybe I should do on the standard trims. I never really thought about it. We don't have too severe brake fade though with the standard trim, so I think I'm going to avoid it. But with this trim, definitely, it's a good idea. And we see the big benefit of that. So, yeah, let's go with vented disc. I didn't really think about it, but that's a really good idea. In any case, we also did an upgrade of 3 pistons in the front and a little bit bigger brake size as well. As a matter of fact, we probably can tone that down a little bit now because we have a lot better performance out of our brakes. And we might be able to do this in the rear as well. Because, you're not having nearly as much brake fade. There's no reason to have big brakes if you don't need them, because they're going to cost you money and weight, to no real other benefit. So we're going to keep going. I might even tone down the aggressiveness of the brake pads to be equivalent to what we were getting before. And you can see the big benefit of having vented discs here. So there we go. So we're starting to have a brake fade. So that's kind of our optimum for the front. Let's see what our optimum for the rear is. Probably still needing decently sized brakes in the rear, because that's where a lot of the weight is. But we're noticing it is not needing nearly as big of brakes. So technically we upgrade the brakes, but they're a lot smaller than what we've seen on our other vehicles. All right, there we go. So that's the best balance. So we have 0 brake fade, and we have our optimum size. All right, so that did a lot of improvements for us as far as our performance, and honestly, that was an oversight on my part not to upgrade it to vented discs. All right, moving along, we have the aerodynamics. This engine is a lot more powerful, so it requires a lot more cooling airflow, so we have to increase that. But we also increase something else, and that is wing angle. You saw that was a wing on there. It is a functional wing. So it's not a lot of... I mean, I didn't increase this a lot. It's only set at 25, but it's going to give us a decent amount of downforce in the rear, giving us decent traction for our wheels. Trying to bring that wheel spin down a little bit, but it also helps our handling a little bit as well. Now, there's going to be detriments to that as well, but you can even see if I kind of adjust this, it also affects our actual stats overall. And then we have our interior setup. So I gave this a sport interior, and this is one thing that I really hemmed and hawed on. You get a prestige bonus, but you lose a lot in comfort. But I felt like it was worth it. And, well, the other thing you do is you also increase the cost quite a bit. So you can see here, production units as well goes up. But as you can see, a very dramatic increase in cost. Now, this is one of the things that I've long kind of disagreed with. If you're going to increase that cost as much as you do, I think there should be another benefit outside of just that prestige. Like, for instance, the weight. Because, like, if you were to think about this... realistically, in realistic terms, I would probably assume what you're doing is you're using some ultralight material. Maybe in modern cars, it would be a, carbon fiber, like, seat with, like, a little bit of cushioning on it. There you lose your comfort because it's, very stiff and what have you. But it's very lightweight. You don't really see that dynamic, and it's a dynamic I wish was in the game. Like, maybe a difference of 15 pounds. It doesn't have to be huge, but... I think that there should be some more benefit to the sports seats, like a logical one, but we don't see that. I kept it with standard cassette because I want there to be a little bit of, luxury to this car. You can blast that music while you rock it around the track if you want. But a true driver's car wouldn't have it, obviously. But I felt like, I wanted to keep it in there. And we also added on traction control from before. And this is mostly just going to help drivability. And, technically you could probably have a setting to turn it off maybe if you wanted to take it around the track, which is maybe why it doesn't really give you a penalty to anything. Just costs a little bit more money. Not a whole lot, but a little bit more money. And it gives you a little bit of a bonus to drivability, which this car is seriously lacking. We're trying to keep it with the traction control a little bit more under control. Okay, moving along, we have the suspension setup. Now, this is quite a bit different than the suspension setups you've seen so far. And a lot of this is to deal with, just the different dynamics, try and get you'll notice that the roll angle is quite a bit lower than you might have seen in some of the other vehicles and what have you. And that's what I was trying to go for, maximum handling that I could get out of the car, with all things considered. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the detailed stats, and I am going to talk about the drivability because the one thing I want to highlight is this engine. See how big of a penalty that is? That is purely because of the engine that we have in there and how aggressive it is. So that's one thing I want to point out. But there's your drivability. We have sportiness. We have comfort. And we have prestige. And finally, we have safety. All right, let's look at our test track. So we already talked about the 0 to 62 time. We also have the top speed. Now, the top speed is 173.9 miles an hour, which is pretty decent, but it would be a lot more if we didn't have that wing. But I like the control that wing gives us, and I'm noticing that the cornering G's has changed quite a bit, and that might be because of all the brake changes I made. Let's just kind of tweak with the suspension sometimes. Sometimes it loads in the suspension a little funky, and maybe if we get it to reload in here, it will give us the cornering G's I expect to see. No, okay. Before I was getting 1.24 G's out of this with the way I had the suspension set up. Maybe I'll tweak something other than ride height. See if we can get it to come back to where I had it before. If it doesn't come back, that's all right. I did do quite a bit of changes to this vehicle so I could understand if things have changed a little bit. I mean, a lot of weight has been changed on this vehicle, so Again, I kind of understand. All right. So, any case, let's go ahead and do the track time, and it's going to be pretty good. Okay, I thought we would have a little bit of fun there and go a little bit longer with that track, uh, the track run there, just so you guys get to see the Comet go around the track, as that's what it's kind of designed for. Now, I'm kind of curious if there's some things that I could do to kind of tweak this, because I have noticed that the cornering ability of this vehicle has been kind of undermined a little bit. By some of the setup I did, a lot of differences in weight balancing. I'm kind of curious if we could actually push out a little bit faster 0 to 62 time because of that weight difference. I mean, it didn't take a whole lot for me to do that, just one nudge of the spacing. Alternatively, we could keep the time the same, but go a little bit less aggressive, and as a result, have better drivability and everything. But I prefer to go with a little bit better 0 to 62 time. Let's see, as a result of that, if we get a better track time, maybe. So let's go for it. Yeah, that's good improvement. It's not huge improvement, but it gets it under that 129 time. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. We got a little bit quicker 0 to 62 time. And let's now look at our market share. So let's start with our base trim, and we'll kind of run through all of them. Now, from what I remember you're going to see pretty much the same categories being met. A lot of the main difference is going to be how the points come in. So where we're coming in is kind of interesting to me. We're coming in predominantly in between Fun Premium and Sports Budget. Now, we're looking for a sports car, but it's funny that we go into the budget category considering how expensive this is. And you can see that affordability is not very good in this category. So we're very competitive as far as how good our car is, but not so affordable to this market segment. So, a decent number of the people in this segment probably will buy it because of how competitive it is, but we'll have not as many sales as maybe we could because not very many people in this segment can afford it. The overall price here is $16,905. That sounds pretty cheap, honestly, and this was with a 5% markup. And I'm actually kind of surprised at how cheap it is, because we did put a lot of decently expensive things into this vehicle, and yet it's still not as expensive as you would think. It also does quite well in the Fun Premium market, and people can afford that pretty well in this segment. It's pretty affordable. We also are pretty big in the muscle car segment, which is kind of surprising considering this is like not a muscle car in any stretch of the imagination. But I guess the straight line performance element of this vehicle is favored. I mean, if you were to, I wouldn't think that you would think a Corvette is a muscle car, but maybe certain era Corvettes would be considered muscle cars. So maybe, I don't know. I find it interesting that we fell into that segment. We do okay in a number of other segments. We do decently in sport. We do decently in the two track categories, track premium and track. We do decently in the light sport and the light sport premium. Not so much in the light sport budget because our car is probably way too expensive. Yeah, affordability is not very good in that segment. But in most of the segments that we fall into, where we score pretty decently, above 65, we're pretty affordable. The main segment that we're doing really well in competitive wise, and we're not doing very well affordability, is the sports budget. Okay, all that said, let's go ahead and jump into the automatic version. And I'm going to go to the overview tab just to make sure we don't have any glitching out, because sometimes that happens when you're switching between trims. They might have fixed that, but I'm just going to do that for safety's sake. So we're switched to our automatic trim. And we'll come in here, and you see that more or less it's pretty much the same. We dropped off quite a bit in score from what I remember, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're using an automatic transmission, and that's going to really hurt our sportiness, which I'm sure most of these categories are all about. So we lose out in our sports budget. We also lose out in affordability. The automatic transmission is a little bit more expensive. And I think we lose out in most categories, but we also gain a couple categories. So we're starting to fall into the family sport and family sport premium categories. We don't score particularly well in those categories, but we also lose out in some categories. For instance, we were doing all right in the pony category. Now we're not doing so well. So a little bit of shifting with that automatic. Now let's jump into, and again, I'm going to go to the overview tab first. Let's shift into our premium trims, and where we fall in here is probably going to change quite a bit as well. So we get in here. Now the price is starting to go up, so affordability is going to become less and less so. But now the muscle car is where we're coming in the most, the muscle car category. Now we're not nearly as affordable as we were with the standard trim, but we are performing a lot better. We're performing a little bit worse in the sports budget, and that's because less and less people can afford it. We do pretty well in the fun premium. I think this performance has also gone up as far as the stats, but again, our affordability has gone down. We're starting to do a lot better, though, also in the sports category. We're getting into the 70s here, so we're kind of going into the segment that we're aiming for, which is the sports segment, but we're not doing it as well as maybe we could. And I think a large part of this is we're doing well in the sportiness and we're doing well in the drivability categories, but we're not doing so well in comfort. And comfort is kind of a element of the sports category. Prestige is also another element of this category that maybe we didn't go for as much. But I could also see why we increase so much in this category because of the premium interior and premium entertainment. Those are going to bring up both comfort and prestige, which is exactly what we were looking for. Okay, now let's look at the automatic version. And again, I want to go to the overview tab first. I keep forgetting. All right, so premium 3.6A. And we're going to see, we had an error message. I think I maybe didn't wait long enough for it to load in. Let's just try and load it in again. I think like a big part of that error is it needs to load in the market segment first, and you have to wait for that. Okay, we didn't get the error that time. So I just have to make sure, because I think if you get the error and you ignore it, what ends up happening is you get the same stats that you got from the last trim you looked at, which is definitely what we don't want to see. So what we see here is we're again in these three main categories, but overall, it looks like we've dropped a little bit in most of the categories. Like we're not doing nearly as well as we were doing in the muscle category here. We definitely dropped off in the sports category as well. I think overall we've dropped. Maybe a little bit of improvement in the sports budget, but again, we're starting to grab segments that we previously weren't. For instance, the family sport premium and the family sport. How this really fits a family sport premium category, I don't know, because it only has 2 seats, but you know, it is what it is. Okay, we have one more trim to look at, and it's the trim we've all been waiting for. How does this one do? And what market segments is it kind of in? All right, so we have the markets, and we notice that this is the biggest change here. So we're now in light sport premium, which I believe we were not in before. We're in muscle, and we're in muscle premium. Now, it's kind of interesting, the shift, because sports budget is now, it's just so unaffordable, this car, that it's really dropped down. We'll note that the affordability of a lot of the things that we were in before has dropped quite a bit, because this car's getting up there in expense. It's getting almost to $22,000. But we're still biggest in the muscle category. But sport category, we haven't actually improved as much as you would think. And as I said, a lot of that has to do with the comfort and the prestige. Maybe we've gained up in prestige, but we've dropped a lot in comfort. And that's because of the sports seats that we ended up selecting. But you also note a couple categories that we now are entering into the super and hyper markets. Now, both of these markets are very affordable because, well, supercars and hypercars tend to be very expensive. So the people that are looking to buy these are going to be able to afford quite a bit. And we're actually doing better than 65 in the super category. So I would consider this a market that we're kind of filling. And this is all about being prestigious and being high performance. So we see that. The big element of this is sportiness and prestige, which we do pretty well with this vehicle. So that's why we're doing pretty decently here. We also are doing okay in the track premium vehicle, but not so much in just a normal track. And I think a lot of that has to do with the affordability, although 74.5% is decent affordability. I think it cuts into it a bit, and I think mostly this is scored just on sportiness, a little bit in drivability, but mostly sportiness. And maybe we didn't go hardcore enough for these track-oriented vehicles. And there's things we could do to go for that. Is try and really go for just a track-oriented car. Strip out the interior. That doesn't really matter. They don't care about prestige. Strip out that interior, lower down that weight, get that sportiness way up, get the 0 to 62 times up, get that performance up. Those are things we can do if we wanted to make a track-oriented car. But this isn't a true track-oriented car, so we're not really meeting those market segments as well as we maybe could. But in any case, I find this very interesting, and we kind of see the shifts as we go through our different trims and which market segments are really looking at our vehicles and enjoying them. It looks like the muscle car segment is our main target, even though that's not what we were aiming for. We hit a little bit, to the left and high with our dartboard, but we are pleasing a market segment, and we're doing it quite well. With I think one of the trims we were up to 90, which is pretty good. That's pretty high in competitiveness. So I think we did pretty well here. Again, we were looking for a sports car, and we were always meeting this market segment, but maybe not as well as some other ones. So very interesting to see. Let's save everything on up. And let's do a very, very quick just comparison. And I'm probably not going to dwell on this too much because this is probably already a very long video. But if you want to look at some of the comparisons between the different trims, you can go ahead and take advantage of that now here. And, pause your screen and look at them. I'm not going to go over them myself, but you can see where they come in. But most of this stuff, it comes in where you would think. Our highest performing sportiness car is the Turbo 3.6T. Makes sense. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner signing out.